History Group got an email probably about over 2 years ago from the archaeologists at Dumfries House Estate who were excavating the site at Pennylands, asking if the History Group had any information on it. And then probably about a year later we were contacted by Liz Jones from Addyman Archaeology, and then yourself from your oral history and training consultancy, and that's how we get involved in the project itself. I thought it would be quite a big project, but I didn't realise it would turn out to be as big as it actually did.
Could you tell me about the 3 different strands to the project?
Well, there was that Archaeology Strand, which kind of started the whole process off, which consisted of archaeological digs, stripping the site, recording everything, and then putting it back into its natural environment, because they were going to be building quite a lot of new buildings around about that place, so the whole thing would have been lost if that hadn't happened. But as I understand it, that was part and parcel of the planning process for East Ayrshire Council anyway, so that they had to do that. The other main strand was the oral history strand, which turned out to be probably the most important strand. That was interviewing people who had first-hand knowledge of either living, working or being born in Pennylands Estate, and that was fantastic, the amount of information we got off of people and the depth of the information we got, and the fantastic stories, some of them quite sad but some of them really funny as well. And then the third strand was the desk research and archival research strand, which sort of tied the 3 of them together. It backed up a lot of hard evidence about when the camp, the 4 different stages of the camp, and we managed to get some real evidence about when specific things happened round about the camp. But also it was a really good sources for linking up some of the stories, the anecdotal stories that people told us through the oral history, and that really gave a bit more relevance and a bit more depth to what they were saying. Plus the fact that we found things that nobody else had even known about, but other stories that became sort of urban myths in surrounding the local area, and we managed to find the source of the urban myths in most cases. So that was a really important way of bringing everything together. At the very beginning of the project we were asked one question: why is the project being run by Cumnock History Group? The answer we gave was that there isn't an Cumnock History Group. The problem, well, it wasn't a problem, the facts were that the camp's actually in Cumnock Parish, not in Cumnock Parish. But we felt it was too important a project just to be nitty-picky about it. So we decided to have the big reminiscence project actually in Cumnock in the Boswell Centre. And we were astounded about how many people turned up to that. There was over 35 people who came to it, and every one of them had a story to tell. And what was brilliant about the reminiscence event is that a lot of these people didn't know each other, but they still had the same memories, but different memories of the same time. And seeing some of the people actually getting together and telling their story, and then somebody would say, "Oh, I stayed up the road from you," was fantastic. And the kind of average age group for the reminiscence events, I think, was, I would say, maybe about 65, 70. But it was, I think the youngest person there was probably about 65, 70. The oldest was in their 90s. So, and people just talked non-stop for 2.5 hours. They wanted to get their stories out. We had a small exhibition to let people fire off their imagination again and to kind of maybe concentrate their memories a wee bit more. They came along with family, with their kids that they're growing up at, daughters and sons. And I think they were so pleased that somebody was actually listening to their story, because I think their families had got a bit fed up hearing those stories year after year. And it was important for them because it was almost legitimising their memories of Penlands in a very informal way, but with the understanding that this would be done in a formal way in the future. And that's after that, that's when we did the interviews. So.
Who came along to the reminiscence?
Yes. Well, we weren't really sure who was going to come, But a lot of people showed up to the first one, the one that was held in Auchinleck. I think they must just have heard about it. Some came because they had questions to ask. Others wanted to tell their stories, like Bobby said. And there must have been... there's over 30, so... two at least were in their 90s. And it was a really nice afternoon because they were really happy to tell their stories and be listened to and share. Some of the campers from the latter stage, you know, they hadn't seen each other for years, and there's a particularly nice photo of some of them chatting to each other, saying, "Oh, it's you," that kind of thing. That was really nice. And others wanted to meet up afterwards. I don't know if they ever did. Jean is a lady in her 90s who remembered her mother telling her about talking to German prisoners of war in New Cumnock, I think it was. They'd been working from the camp up there, and although her mother couldn't chat to the Germans in German, and they couldn't speak English, they seemed to form a friendship, and that was one of the cases where the guy wrote back in German, and Jean had to translate for her mum. And that correspondence seemed to keep on till the fellow died.
So there was 4 distinct phases. There was the first phase, which was it was called Pennylands Barracks, which was the training camp for Allied and British troops. But it did start off as a tented camp, and then it became they built it especially for the prisoners of war. After that, the prisoners of war were moved in, but a lot of these things run in parallel. I think the camp was split into 2 at one point, where the Allied troops were still there being trained, but the prisoners of war, the Italians, were the first prisoners there. After the prisoners of war petered out and at the end of the war and they were repatriated home, it became a repatriation camp for Polish soldiers who weren't prisoners of war. They were released from Germany and various other places throughout Europe. And then shortly after that, it became an overspill housing camp that Ayr County Council took over for local families, because after the war, the housing shortage was really, really quite severe all over Britain. But we did find, when we were doing the research and listening to people's stories, that some of these timelines actually crossed over. So it wasn't one day it was a prisoner of war camp, the next day it was the Polish soldiers, the repatriation camp. It's like everything else in life, there was merging and gaps and stuff. So, but we're still finding things out even just now, nearing the end of the project. So that's that.
Yes, Johnny Styrsky, his family had come from Poland much earlier. But he had learnt to dive in Cumnock Pool before he could swim. And I think his older brother also was a famous diver, so he was. They would do displays at the pool, and they were well known locally for this. So I'm talking about the 1940s probably. It was quite moving. He did recall a story, an eyewitness account of seeing a guard shoot a prisoner, and I've not been able to find anything to substantiate that anywhere. It's possible that it was a cover-up, but it was quite a sad story, and it's something that it was only a lad when this happened, so it must have stayed with him for a long time.
Right, Bobby, could you tell me about the archaeology strand of the project?
The Archaeology Strand, we were really keen to have that involving as many people in the community of Auchinleck and Cumnock as possible, because anybody that's watched the Time Team and TV will know that it's always a huge community draw for this. And it also was about people's curiosity of what was happening out there, because when the professional dig was happening before we really got involved, there was Dumfries House Estate. It's a really busy estate. There's people in it all the time, and people were always stopping past and telling them their little stories to the archaeologists. And it was archaeologists that actually suggested there was an oral history strand in this, involving the members of the community, and I think that, as I said before, that worked really well. The community dig happened in March over a weekend, over 2 days, with really good weather for it. We had to do it in March because it was before the undergrowth started growing and hiding the base of the brick-built bases that were still there. This was the very south of the camp. We had probably about maybe 30 or 40 walk-bys, local people asking what were happening, but we also had about the same number of people actually taking part in the dig, and that was from 8-year-old kids right up to 85-year-old people as well, on their hands and knees with towels, doing the full-time team thing. Unfortunately, we didn't find very much. We found an old sink and a Bakelite light fitting, and that was about it. But that was enough because it really fired up people's imagination, and we just took it from there.
Can you tell me your name, please?
Liz Jones.
And why are you here today?
I work for Addyman Archaeology, and we did the excavations over the way for the Farm Education Centre last year. And during that time we met loads of people who had loads of memories of the camp and everything. So we got in touch with the local history group and Sue, the historian, and that's how we ended up with the community project. So this weekend we've been just clearing off one of the huts here. This is the last surviving area of the camp. There's about 9 or 10 huts we found here this weekend. We recorded them. So we cleared off one of them and did a really nice drawing, and it seems to be this is one of the wash houses. So we found a couple of drains and we found a really nice layout of where the sinks or showers or whatever would have been. And then we've just been doing an overall plan of all the huts we can see in this area, and then we can overlay that on the aerial photograph. And then this will add to our picture of the whole camp that we've been building up after the site. So.
Who's been involved with the dig over the weekend?
People from Cumnock History Group who've gotten involved through Facebook. Sue, the oral historian's been here. Scott, who ran the excavations last year, he's been here with me. And we've had a few people dropping in yesterday, and a few kids yesterday as well. So it's been great.
Would you say it's been a success?
It's been lovely. Yeah, people have all been really keen to get stuck in and everything, and we've had great chats with people just wandering by, and loads of people who happen to have lived here before, which is amazing. So
Alison Brown.
Susan Brown, but no really, well, a relation, it could be.
Remarried, we've discovered
Today.
And Laura Carmichael.
Great, thank you. Could you tell me what you've been doing today?
We've just been clearing the building behind you, finding out about the walls and things, and clearing out drains, and clearing out the channels between the various partitions.
Have you enjoyed it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Always
been a good
wanted
day.
to do this.
Yeah, I've always wanted to do it. I think I've always felt as if I disappointed my history teacher by dropping 6-year history. So I feel as if
Me
I've
too,
made up.
we're making
We're making up for it.
So what time did you get here this morning?
9:30.
Are you coming tomorrow?
Oh yes, it was such good fun.
I know.
Really enjoyed it.
You have to be honest though when you watch these digs and televisions.
It is hard work.
It's like, you don't realise it's such
It is
hard work.
I'm looking forward to a bath tonight.
With no geophys. What's his name in the time team? Baldrick.
Yeah,
Robinson.
Oh,
Tony Robinson.
Yeah, but it's social history, it's fascinating.
Excellent. Do you think you found out more about the camp today?
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely.
I didn't know that this bit existed. I knew about the other bit growing up here, but didn't realise the size of it and the history. So it's been good hearing how many people actually were here, and that it was also a army camp and as well as a prisoner of war camp.
That's excellent. Thank you very much, ladies.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much. Ask you about the oral history strand. What kind of training did you have?
We had quite intensive training from yourself over, I think it was 2 full days and a half day. That involved about 7 or 8 of what we called our history champions, which was quite a big challenge for people in the history group, because some of them hadn't, well, none of them had done anything like this before. They were a wee bit nervous, but I think yourself really calmed them down, explained to them it wasn't rocket science, you just follow a few simple rules and stuff and not get phased and do lots of practicing. The training consisted of yourself going through the different phases of preparation for each interview, the group getting together and brainstorming what type of questions we might have to ask, because obviously we were interviewing people from different phases of the camp.
Okay, could you tell me about the oral history training, please?
Yeah, it was actually really, really interesting, and there's a lot more to it than you might imagine. All the content was really, really interesting. I wasn't sure that it was my thing at all, and I don't think I'm a very good interviewer, because I'm not very good at just keeping quiet and listening. However, with practice I'm sure we'd get better. I think we should have practiced, or I personally should have practiced a bit more before we set off. And also I think preparing the interviewees, we were to contact the interviewees beforehand and have a wee chat on the phone, which was good. And it's also quite nerve-wracking during the interviews, because you never were quite sure what they were going to say, and then you have to really think on your feet and pick up on it or ask for clarification without wanting to interrupt too much. You know, it's a very fine line to get it right, you know. I found that quite tricky, but I really enjoyed listening to the stories. The stories were just great. The interviewers were wonderful, and I'd like to thank them for allowing us into their homes as well, because that's quite a big thing, a stranger coming into your home and asking personal questions. So well done to them all. They were also very generous, allowing us to take their photographs and some mementos for the exhibition. Again, we'd like to thank them for that.
Can I ask you about the volunteer coordination?
Yes.
How easy was that?
Yeah, I think they needed a little bit of reassurance, but it wasn't terribly hard. I tried to place them, give them people to interview that weren't too far from where they were. And sometimes they did 2 in the same day, which was quite tiring, I think, but at least it meant it was all done and dusted and less travelling about. So that was okay. The editing, listening and the transcribing I found quite tedious. Listening to it again and again. I don't know, I think I just made a meal of it. I just took too long doing it. So that was, as Bobby said, that was a lot of work at that particular stage, I think, doing the transcribing.
You kept in touch with the volunteers throughout?
Yes.
How was that?
Yeah, that was fine. I think the very first interview had not gone very well. There was a lot of background noise, but the lady in concern was very keen to do it again, and she did. She found a quieter venue, so that was good. But she was really kind of upset that she'd made a mess of it. It wasn't really not her fault. What else was there? I managed to mess up one of mine as well, because despite having checked everything, I didn't actually have the recorder on at one point, so I had to go back and record the gentleman a second time. So thanks for the forbearance there.
What was it like to actually interview someone?
Nerve-wracking. Very, very nervous. But we did practice in each other to begin with, which was really, really helpful. But you're actually face-to-face with somebody, and remember, none of us had done this before. What then happened actually during the interview was people relaxed a bit more, and what we found that once they started telling their story, they just ran with it. I mean, sometimes you can shut people up, to be quite honest, but we knew that we could edit any background noises and things out, and that took a bit of quite a while to do, and we were also offered training and editing techniques as well, which was really, really useful. So the interviews lasted between 5 minutes and an hour and a half, and most of the stuff that people gave us were absolutely brilliant. There was some things where people started to wander off the storyline, but the people that were interviewing were really good at bringing that back in. But of course, sometimes we just let people talk because that's what they just wanted to tell their story. Sometimes for the first time ever, they'd actually told it to people. And we found we really wanted to record everything they said, even though it might not always be used in the final exhibition for the stuff. But what they were saying was really important for them and for the whole oral history capturing side of it, because people might never interview them about this again. So this is a real historic document that will be useful for the archivists and researchers for years to come.
Like Bobby said, a lot of the respondents were just keen to tell their story, even though it wasn't necessarily particularly relevant. My own particular interest is in family history, so I just love to find out about their stories, where their families came from, and that kind of thing. So I also asked a lot of irrelevant questions just for my own personal knowledge, build up a picture. An interesting story though was Elizabeth Parole. As a small child, she had lived in a tenement, and she went to visit the neighbours all the time as a toddler. She was in the neighbour's house all the time, so much so that she actually moved in with the neighbours. And this had a huge impact on her future life because the neighbours were Polish. So she learnt to speak Polish. And that is how she met her husband. When she met her husband at the dance, she could speak to him. So that just had a huge impact on the rest of her life. Just an amazing story. Loved it. I was also interested to hear about the Dornis family. They came from Santander in Spain in 1915, off the top of my head. They came on a boat to Ardrossan because they'd been recruited to work in the Lugar Ironworks. And apparently when the mother saw the grey bleakness of Lugar and the weather, she said that if there had been a bridge, she'd have walked back to Santander. However, they stayed and they're still in the area, and the family's done very well.
One great story was Elizabeth Parole. When she got married, she married one of the Polish soldiers who was stationed at the camp, and she told us the story about her wedding being interrupted by gunshots, and before the wedding even took place. So everything came to a total standstill. The two men that were injured, the Polish soldiers that were injured, were taken to hospital, and she went to visit them, and she said it was fantastic because she felt like the Queen Mother. She had to go in her bridal outfit to visit them in the hospital. Now, through the research, we found two local stories in the local papers that actually mentioned that, and Elizabeth was really pleased to see these newspaper clippings, so that kind of backed up her story, because sometimes people's memories get a bit loose and they get the dates and stuff wrong, but not your wedding, of course. One of the other fantastic stories that was going about in Auchinleck for years was the mushroom poisoning of Polish soldiers. And the story was that the living graves in Auchinleck Cemetery were all Polish soldiers who had been poisoned by mushrooms. It turned out that none of the soldiers in the graves there had died of mushroom poisoning, but we did find a small newspaper article in the local chronicle that confirmed that two Polish soldiers had actually died of mushroom poisoning. So there was that little grain of truth in all the urban myths. One of the other ones was about two boys that had been killed through a grenade explosion, which was a really sad story, and that was quite early on in the history of the camp, when it was still a training camp for Allied and British troops. So we did a bit of a backstory in that. Kay did some family research to back all that up, and that was quite a poignant story. And also a couple of stories through the oral history interviews about a Polish suicide that had happened, which was really sad, and some other stories about people who'd been held as prisoners of war there, and a bit of their background information about their family history. And we found that that was a really poignant way of retelling the story of the camp, was through people's background, history, and also their history at the time that they spent at Pennylands Camp, whether it was either soldiers stationed there or billeted there, but also the prisoners of war, both Italian and German, and also the people that were born in the camp, and their stories about how long they stayed there, and their eventual story about moving out. And it all kind of linked into the general history of Auchinleck and the surrounding area and Cumnock, so that was a really good way of using the research to back up the anecdotal stuff that people were telling us.
I like listening to the stories of the youngsters who lived in the camp. Because of the time scale, most of our interviewers were people that had actually lived in the housing stage of the camp, and some of them just had an idyllic childhood, or I'm sure their parents didn't think it was that idyllic, but the children thought it was a wonderful playground. They had a great big wood to explore, a river to play in, old ruined houses to explore and things like that. And they seem to have had really generally very happy memories. Their parents, I'm sure, were less enamoured, but I don't know, perhaps it was the height of the best kind of housing available. The alternative, I think, at that time was for young married people after the war, was they moved in with their parents. So it was an improvement. They had a place of their own. It might not have been most luxurious, but it was their own, and they made the most of it. They seemed to acquire things from other parts of the camp. They made use of things. They made improvements. In fact, some of them got charged with stealing things, which seems a bit harsh, because really it was stuff that nobody wanted that they were making use of to improve their houses when the council weren't doing anything. So I felt a bit sorry about that. Getting a criminal record just to improve your life. Such were the times.
I believe some of the respondents talked about some of the prisoners of war working on the farms.
Oh yes, we didn't really mention that. A lot of the prisoners of war were allowed out on farms. They were transported apparently by the milk lorry. The Houston's and Brothers milk lorry would take them. And they didn't even seem to necessarily have any guards with them. They would be dropped off at the road end and walk up to the farm. Some people went regularly to the same farm, and others, it was just at times of the harvest and when there was a lot of work to be done, they would have extra people. And they seem to have got on very well with the farmers, and with at least 2 stories of them writing to people once they've gone back to Germany, keeping in touch with the families that they'd been with. A lot of respect on both sides, I think.
I believe that you had one respondent come over from Cooper to be interviewed.
That's right. Ian Nimmo had visited the camp between it being the prisoner of war camp and the Polish repatriation camp. Now, his father was working there as liaison or something to do with the changeover, and it was in the summer holidays, his mother and he had come down to stay with his dad, and he has quite a lot of good memories. He remembered seeing the gardens that the German prisoners of war had made round their huts. It was all very pretty, and there's lovely murals painted in the canteen. And he also, his father had been presented with a carved plaque from one of the German soldiers as a memento. And he's given us a loan of that for the exhibition, which is very kind of him. Apparently, though, when the Polish soldiers arrived at the camp, though, they destroyed all these nice little gardens that the Germans had made. No love being lost between the Polish and the Germans.
Is there anyone else that you would like to interview that hasn't been yet?
We've had contact from a fellow who lives now in Buckie, but as a child he lived on Dumfries House Estate, and his name is Ferris Little. His father was James Little, and he was an estate shepherd, so he was there from his childhood right up to the 60s, and he's provided us a lot of information of what the estate was like and some photographs as well. So I believe he is going to come down in November, though, so that'll be really nice to meet him.
Can I bring you onto the research? Could you tell me what kind of sources you looked at?
we had a quick brainstorming session about that when we realised that there was quite a lot of stuff out there that we probably didn't know existed. So we wanted to try and cast the net as wide as we could. But we did start off locally. We checked the local archives first, the local libraries, etc., etc. We found a lot of information about Penlands in the local newspaper, the Cumnock Chronicle, but not during the period of it being the training camp and the prisoner of war, because I think there was some sort of press embargo on that. But after that period, there was hundreds of articles almost on a weekly basis. I mean, some of them quite funny, some of them quite sad, as I said before. But that all added to the general research and the whole project. We did go to Ayrshire archives, which was a really useful source. We managed to access the evaluation rolls for the full 10 years of Penlands Camp being used by Ayr County Council for housing purposes. We got the start date and the end date for that. We even got everybody's names for the whole 10-year period that stayed in the camp with their address. So that was invaluable. A lot of online research. We used the Hansard records for Emrys Hughes, the local MP, who fought quite hard for the camp to be transferred from the prisoner of war camp to the housing camp, but that didn't happen. It was then the intervening period of the Polish repatriation camp. Found out quite a lot through local sources like the Third Statistical Account for Scotland. Well, one of the important sources of information that came to light through the Cumnock History Group members was from Muriel Gordon. She'd got a copy of a report that was commissioned by the International Red Cross in 1945. I think it was about a 14-page document which actually listed how many German prisoners of war were there, what the ranks and everything else, the background was, what the conditions were like in the camp, and we were quite astounded when we read this report, because seemingly they not only had just the prisoner of war camp, they had an infirmary, a bakery, a theatre, a library, and they run lots of courses for the prisoners of war and English language and politics, had guest speakers coming along. We also found out that the prisoners of war, the German ones, were actually paid for the work that they did in the farms through the Geneva Convention, and it turned out somewhere between like 5 shillings and 2 and 6 a week, depending what type of work they did. We also found quite a lot of information on books about Dumfries House itself and the relationship the Marquis of Bute had with the camp, because obviously the Department of War had requisitioned the camp from the Marquis of Bute, but before the camp was actually built, it given permission to the Ministry, the Department of War, to use the surrounding fields for billeting soldiers for training. But then it was much more formalised, and they requisitioned a 12-acre plot, which at that time was open fields, and that became Penlands Camp itself, surrounded by barbed wire. And it was partitioned into two separate camps at one point as well. There was quite a lot of evidence that correlated from the archaeological digs. They found quite a lot of pieces of barbed wire and various parts to do with the building of the site. And there was also a report that I found from the Ayrshire County Archives about a report about the water supply and the toilet facilities, the sewage from the camp, saying there was grave concerns about the possibility of cholera and typhus from the camp, and a lot of that had to be the water system had to be relayed and cleaned before they actually let people move in as a housing camp at the time. But there was quite a lot of good information from a particular book about Dumfries House that was based on the archives that are still up at Mount Royal, the Dumfries House archives. That's one of the few sources that I've not touched at the moment, because it would actually entail going up there for a couple of days and staying overnight at Mount Stewart and Isle of Bute. So that's an untapped source of information that we might tap pretty near in the future.
Did you use social media at all for the project?
Yes, very much. It's been really helpful because we've made contact, as Bobby said, with people all over the world. We had a lady in Houston, Texas, whose father had been a prisoner of war in the Pennylands, and she had sent to the International Red Cross to get his records, and she's forwarded the records and some photographs of her father, who had also worked on farms in the area. And he had gone to America shortly after the war. He'd been sponsored. I'm not quite sure how that worked, but somebody in America had sponsored him to go over. And as I said, the woman from France who knew the colonel, who's still alive in his 90s, she got in touch through the Pennylands page on Facebook. Some other German POWs that had worked on Dalmaca farm. The letter came from Zolingen, so I did a wee bit of detective work, and I found a Zolingen Facebook group, and I said the name and the address, and were there any family members? And a lady got back in touch to say that it was her uncle, because she remembered going to visit him in that address. Although I think he must have died fairly soon afterwards, because she didn't really have an awful lot of other memories. She said he had one daughter who had never married, so there weren't any descendants, but it was a good contact to have.
And I believe that you've given a public presentation.
Oh, yes, I did, to the history group. A lot of people that we'd never seen before turned up to hear it, and that was really gratifying. People are really interested about it, and I think that, as Bobby says, this is a project that could go on and on. As more people find out about our research and want to give us their stories.
Social media has been really quite a huge thing for this project, but we were very much aware that a lot of the people that we were looking for first-hand knowledge might not be on social media, but their sons, daughters, grandchildren would be on social media, and we contacted a lot of people through Facebook and also through our website, because of course we've got a section on the website that's totally dedicated to Penlands, which will be expanding pretty soon once all the research has been put together, along with the interviews and the finds from the archaeological digs. So it's a resource that will be there forever and ever, really. As long as we keep up the website, it's going to be there. The Oral History Archive will be deposited at the University of Strathclyde and also at the Burns Monument Centre in Cumnock, because that's a local archive centre. At the Burns Monument Centre, there will also be all the research materials deposited there, which will be fully catalogued for people to access in the future as well. And of course it will all be online, including the sound files.
Bobby mentioned the 2 boys that were killed. Do you know that story?
Yes. It was, according to one of our respondents, who was actually an eyewitness, they had picked up a grenade on Aird's Moss, and there must have been at least 4 close by, 2 sets of brothers, the Kavanagh brothers and the McAtee brothers, and other lads. There would be, I think the 2 that were killed were 13 and 11, that sort of age, and one was the older one, I think, was killed almost instantly, if not instantly, and his brother died several days later in hospital. And a third boy was badly injured, Frank McAtee, but he apparently survived. And as I say, a respondent was nearby and saw it happen. A lot of the respondents that were young lads at the time said they would go to the camp and look for badges, any kind of militaria that they could take to school and swap in the playground. It was the Pokemon or whatever it was, what do you call these, whatever they swap in the playground nowadays. That was what they would do. So great competition to find things, but a grenade was not a good thing to find. And then there was the story of the shooting at the camp. a young lad had found a gun in one of the huts, and he shot it at some other children, narrowly missing them. They were very lucky to escape, but it was actually a loaded gun. And that was the Donis, Jerry Donis, was on his bogey and got shot at and disarmed the lad and saved his 2 young sisters. And it made at least 2 national newspapers.
There were stories of the French soldiers that were there in, I think it was 1944.
1944, that's right.
What were the stories about them?
Right. Well, we've heard that they seem to have been a wild bunch. I'm not sure that this is entirely justified, but the stories were they were fairly lively. There's stories, unsubstantiated stories of them jumping off Town Hall balcony, the Cumnock Town Hall balcony at the dances. There's also unsubstantiated stories of them training to parachute off Ballochmyle Viaduct. But again, like most of these stories, this is probably an element of truth in it. At the moment, I've got somebody who found that one of the colonels is still alive in France, and somebody's going to ask him some questions for us in France. And we've got lots of photographs from that period. There's a lot of the Polish soldiers married locally, and Elizabeth Parol knew them all and helped peace in them. Some of them moved on, but a lot stayed in the area. But of that generation, I think Elizabeth or Betty is the only one still alive that we've come across so far anyway.
Bobby, you went into the schools with the Pennylands project. Could you tell me about that, please?
We were invited out to the Boswell Centre again by Auchinleck Primary School, who were doing a history project about Auchinleck itself, and the people that were organising it from the Boswell Centre had invited us to come out, because I thought that would be a perfect way to involve kids in it. We took the mini exhibition out with lots of pictures of the camp itself, where it was, and some people's stories and newspaper clippings. There was probably about 20 odd pupils there from Auchinleck Primary, but the great thing about it was we took them out to actual Penlands itself in a minibus, and we showed them round the whole area where the camp had been. So some of the kids had heard of Penlands through their grandparents, but a lot of them didn't know anything about it at all. But there was two specific things they loved. They loved the story about the shots being fired at the wedding in Auchinleck, and they loved one of the newspaper stories about 2 of the Germans that had escaped from Penlands, giving themselves up because they were starving, and they gave themselves up and came back to the camp. So they loved these 2 stories, and they drew little postcards with little drawings and a little message about what they liked about that whole story. So we're hoping that Auchinleck Primary will be involved in the exhibition, whether it's a day at the museum to go through a guided tour through the whole thing. But it would be really nice to have some future project where it would be a cross-generational thing between kids primary school age and their grandparents or their great-grandparents. So quite looking forward to exploring that a bit further.
Bobby, can I ask you what your plans are for an exhibition?
We've been very lucky. We've had agreement and had quite a lot of consultation with East Ayrshire Leisure, who've agreed that the exhibition can be held in the Baird Institute it opens on the 13th of January 2018, and that will run for 3 months with a series of talks supporting that. And it's an exhibition that I think will really attract people from not just the locality but from nationally, but also internationally as well. It will be fully advertised over all media, the internet, social media and the newspapers. We've got a couple of contacts, but one of the guys that we interviewed is an ex-journalist, and he's got good contacts in Germany, so we're still waiting to hear back from some of the German press to see if they'll actually tell the story in the German press, to see if we can get more information about some of the German prisoners of war that were stationed here. But this was never ever planned at the beginning of the project, a professional exhibition in a museum. So this is an added bonus, but it's using our contacts through the Cumnock History Group that's enabled that to happen.
And you've also got a mobile exhibition.
Yes, that was part of the original application to the Heritage Lottery Fund, which of course funded the whole project. We got a grant of £10,000 for that. And the mobile exhibition will be a series of small portable roll-up banners that we can take about with us, supported by a leaflet to schools, community centres, old people's homes, anywhere that people really want it. It can be a standalone that doesn't have to have somebody there telling us about it. But what we've already started doing and developed anyway is a PowerPoint presentation that sits along with all our other PowerPoint presentations about the general history of Cumnock, so that can tour about as well, and people can go and visit and talk about Pennylands. We're also hoping to produce some type of book at the end of the project, but that will need another source of funding. We've also been supported to a certain extent by Dumfries House Estate as well, which has always been really important since it is on the estate. So we're hoping that we can work with them to produce a book at the end of it.
Bobby, is there anyone that you would particularly like to acknowledge for the project?
Yes, yourself, Sue Morrison, of course. Addyman Archaeology, and specifically Liz Jones, the new curator at Dumfries House Estate, East Ayrshire Leisure for helping to get the exhibition project off the ground, all the people in the Cumnock History Group, especially the people that conducted interviews and helped with the research. Specifically, we call them the history champions. And of course, Came Up Making the Secretaries co-managed this project along with myself. So, and of course, the really important people are the people that we interviewed. We interviewed 17 people, which was a lot of work, but it was well worth every minute of recording time.
Could you tell me what has been the best part of the project for you?
I think just meeting all these interesting people. Who knew they had such interesting lives until you ask them these questions? It's just been amazing hearing their stories. Just loved it.
Have there been any negatives to the project?
Yeah, there was a lot of work involved and probably could have organised it a bit better. Or maybe because we didn't realise how much time it was going to take, you know. But generally, there's not very much I would change. I think we did a pretty good job.
Could you tell me what has been the best thing about the project?
The best thing about the project, hearing people's stories really is the best thing that's happened, because it's gave a real insight to what life was like at that time, either being there when you weren't allowed near the camp but you lived on the estate, or you saw the camp, parts of it being built, or you had stories about some of the Polish soldiers coming into Auchinleck or Cumnock to visit and going to local local dances in the town hall. We heard stories about people giving hospitality to some of the Allied soldiers, brought them into their home, made them feel welcome, because they felt that the same welcome would be given to their sons and daughters who were prisoners of war over in Europe. And that was quite important. The sad stories were just as important as good stories, though. There was one really poignant story from one of the women that had married a Polish guy about how the Polish soldiers had actually been captured in Germany, which was quite sad. But also very joyous things about obviously people getting married, people being born in the camp, and the days when poverty was quite rife in this area, and people didn't have two pennies to rub together, but the sense of community was really quite strong, as strong if not stronger as even today in Cumnock and Auchinleck. So that whole side of it was really great. Meeting new people was fantastic. And the sense that people, when you were talking to people and they were telling their stories, were really reliving these for real. And the fact that we were interested enough to actually listen to them and record these things, and everybody was delighted that Penlands was in everybody's lips through the local newspapers, through the website and stuff, and I think they just felt that their memories had been sort of appreciated and respected.
What was the worst thing about the project?
The volume of work that actually, and hours that we spent doing it. There was nothing really negative about it from my viewpoint, but till you're actually halfway through something like that, you don't realise how much work is actually in front of you till you get to the end. But the thing is about this project, I don't think there's an end. I mean, there'll always be little pieces of information that will come across, and that's one of the good things that have come out. The negative side of it is because we've realised that the more this project grows, I think the more people are going to be contacting us about it. And it's not just a local thing, I think it's going to be an international thing. We've had people that have been contacting us from France, from Germany, from Poland, from Canada, from America, all over the place. People that have actual memories, still have memories of it, or people who remember their parents talking about it, or their grandparents talking about it. So it's been a great project to be involved in.